So are you guys ready for X-Wing 3.0? And I'm kidding, but I'm not really kidding, and I have to wonder when it does happen. I think it's coming sooner than we think. When it does happen, is that going to be the final decline of an amazing game? And yes, every game has a life cycle. Every game needs to be rebooted or re-imaged. But the jump from X-Wing 1.0, X-Wing Classic as we're calling it, to 2.0, massive, massive momentum was lost. Momentum that being at the right place at the right time, just all those factors X-Wing had, you will never be able to recapture that. You will never be able to recapture that. And Fantasy Flight, they pulled the usual, but they lost a lot. Okay, let me back that up and kind of then we'll look at what if there is an X-Wing 3.0. I was all in, a little history, I was all in on 1.0. I loved playing narrative. I loved playing Epic. Epic was a major kind of staple of my X-Wing diet. I was playing in tournaments easily once a month, sometimes twice a month. The X-Wing scene was massive, and I was all in. I have everything for 1.0. Not simply to have the cards to be able to compete in tournaments, but because I genuinely loved the universe. I wanted to have everything. I wanted to have multiples of everything. I wanted to put down 20 TIE fighters. I wanted to put down 20 headhunters. I wanted to put down, the entire Red Squadron and everything on that. And when the jump to 2.0 happened, I actually exercised some impulse control, and I said, I'm going to convert over my collection for the ships that I want to play, and I'm only going to collect the ships that I want to play. And I found this really odd because I'm a completionist. I love having everything in the collection to be able to bring out and play, and I loved the game, but I found that loss of momentum where I started to notice the fracturing in the X-Wing community, and that got me kind of thinking. And since we've been playing 2.0, now looking when 3.0 happens, what is that going to mean? And I'm only speaking from my immediate meta. I'm talking about playing here in New York, making my way up to Connecticut, making my way around a little bit, and having some other friends in the community that while we don't play, we talk tactics, we strategize, and I get a sneak peek, I get a snapshot of what their meta is, what their community is. Much like when you guys leave comments and email on my blog and comments, I really, really appreciate that. Taking the time, taking your life force and time and helping me to evolve as a better player, sharing your opinion. But it's amazing because it gives me a little insight into your gaming group. So I appreciate that. And I also acknowledge that my experience doesn't speak for all experiences. But I've been pretty plugged in. So we talk about 1.0, this idea, and we'll take it. What I'm about to say, like any company would be like, hey, we'll take it. Right place, right time, right momentum, right everything was X-Wing 1.0. Star Wars was on the way up. A miniatures game for Star Wars that's pre-painted, ready to play, that you could pick up, that has both narrative and competitive play. So many people jumped in on it. Players that played Warhammer 40,000 at the time, Games Workshop did not have its act together. They were failing in many ways. And they were ignoring the community. And you saw for 3 years straight, X-Wing miniatures taking a major bite out of Games Workshop. Of course, this is going a number of years back. So it's interesting to see how fast, in terms of gaming years, that shifted, that pivot. So you saw in the trades, when you look, top 5 miniature games, top 5 war games. Warhammer 40K, Warhammer 40,000 was always on the top. And then Warhammer Fantasy. Warhammer Fantasy slipped. Games Workshop's getting nervous. All right, let's blow it up the end times and come out with Age of Sigmar. But that's going to take a little bit of traction. But we still got 40K. And you saw X-Wing moving up to getting in the top 5, the top 3. X-Wing surpassing Warhammer 40,000. Because all these players jumping in. All these players jumping in. And I have to say, one of the reasons why I am so successful X-Wing Miniatures competitive play is because I'm going to commit heresy here a little bit. I enjoy Star Wars. I like Star Wars. I don't need to live Star Wars. I'm not immersed in the Star Wars narrative as much as I am, say, Warhammer 40,000 or BattleTech. So with that, I jumped into X-Wing miniatures, not necessarily because it was Star Wars, but because it was Star Wars on that narrative. But so many players were playing it, and I said, hey, the ships look great. I don't have to paint them, and we can just literally pop them out. I remember like going to the store, buying a bunch, going to the club, and as I'm on the train, like popping these things out to get ready to play. Just that level of fun. And you have new players at the time coming into the game, Star Wars enthusiasts. It was just a license to print money. So they're number one. They're displacing Games Workshop. So how did we get 2.0, and what leads to 3.0? Well, we get to 2.0, we get to 3.0. Fantasy Flight, their marketing, their system is they come out with a core game, they release expansions. And then when it reaches a certain point, when they figure everyone's bought everything, they reboot it. They change it, they tweak a little bit, but essentially you have to buy entirely new stuff. We saw this with Descent First Edition, Descent Second Edition. We saw this with Runebound Second Edition, Runebound Third Edition. And there's a big difference between, and I'm all in on Runebound. I'm a little bit of a Fantasy Flight fanboy. I mean, I can admit it. They have titles that I enjoy that are in my top 10. I play Descent First Edition and Second Edition. I play Runebound Second. I play Runebound Third. But making that jump from a board game with 3 or 4 or 5 expansions is pricey. You'll get a new version. Making the jump for a miniatures war game where you have multiples, right? Runebound, I buy the Fallen Star expansion. I just buy one. It's, at the time it was like $20, let's say $22. I buy an A-Wing at the time when it was hyped up, it's $15. Okay, I'm not just buying one A-Wing. I'm buying a lot of A-Wings. And even if I'm a completely narrative player and I love A-Wings, I might buy like 3 so I can have a little squadron flying. So you have this model that worked for board gaming that they just rolled over into X-Wing. And you have people with massive, massive collections. I mean, the size of the collections, they announced 2.0. Now, some rules needed to be changed. I don't mind rules upgrades, things like that. But to jump to 2.0, and then you see the conversion kits, and this was before people started printing their own conversion kits and going through other channels, just crunching the numbers, myself and other players, no joke, no exaggeration, we're looking and saying, to convert all of my collection would cost $1,000 or more just to convert the stuff I want to maybe play competitive, looking at one faction. You're looking at like $500. It was crazy. And I can't even justify it and say, well, look, it's miniatures. I'm dropping $25 for a little plastic spaceship, but it's a plastic spaceship and I can zoom it around on the table. No, thousands of dollars for paper, for cardstock, that shifted the momentum. And the shift ever since that, it's been a cooling effect. A lot of players never jumped over to 2.0. The players that did jump to 2.0, like myself, there's not as much enthusiasm. I still love the game. I still play it, but I'm not all in. I've been able to restrain myself. New players have been less to the game because as time moves on, there's other board games. We saw the explosion of Kickstarter. We see other areas vying for your gaming time. The point is that they had this massive momentum, literally dethroning Games Workshop. And by pulling their reboot, they didn't understand this is a miniatures game. It's not a board game. You can't do that. You cannot do that. And that really cost a lot of momentum. So now we see Fantasy Flight, for a number of years, reacquired, restructuring. We're seeing them drop a lot of titles. We're seeing they got rid of the Runebound war game. You see them pushing and pulling different areas, and they announced that X-Wing Miniatures and other aspects of their miniature division are going to this new company to kind of manage that. What that means, that's going to be 3.0 because they're going to want to inject their designs. They're going to want to put their stuff and push that out from it. Can the company, can the game, can it survive 3.0? that fracture on the fracture, you already gave up massive momentum, and there's a lot more competition. The game is not going to die. It's not going anywhere, but the glory days of X-Wing miniatures, and maybe that's not necessarily a bad thing, those days, I don't see that momentum being captured again. Your thoughts on that? Now, the downside to that is there won't be as much product produced. I do want more ships for my factions. I do want more stuff. Putting it from that perspective, it's in the best interest to have something be super successful, to have it be hyped and over successful, because that's going to keep the momentum of the game printing and ships. If it kind of cools down to where it's like, hey, we have an IP and most of our sales will come from people that pick it up casually, play a few times, and then it goes in their closet. There's money to be made in that. That's a model, but that type of model does not get the level of support and new injection of ships and expansions based on the system that something primary does. And that's a little bit sad, and that's kind of from that perspective. So I do see 3.0 coming, but how much of a radical shift can they contain it? And just how well can they manage what little momentum is left with X-Wing miniatures? So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys in the comments. And again, this is just my meta. This is just my experience. If X-Wing is massive in your area and it's exploding and you're like, Fritz, this is like 10 minutes of you have no idea what you're talking about because we've got like 100 players. You know, we're kicking out the Magic players every Friday because X-Wing's massive. Like, I would love to hear that. I would love to see that. I would love to know that that still exists out there in the mainstream. But tapping into that, I am hopeful. We'll see. But it depends on how they handle the 3.0 reboot.